I am about to be speaking with John Good Vibes, JG Vibes. Some of you know his work from the Intel Hub, also his book, an 87-chapter textbook on the awakening called Alchemy of the Modern Renaissance. And he is also my regular monthly guest. John keeps up with the news probably more than I do.
Hello.
How you doing, brother? Welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going pretty good, man. I was just telling everybody a little bit about you, that you're my regular guest on here, and wanted to bring you on again and just catch up with the news that's been happening this week, and I think we got a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot's been happening.
Yeah, I wanted to talk with you and I guess just bring to everybody's attention. So the Fiscal Cliff, first of all, is the first thing I wanted to get into, and I've got some information here. Some facts on the situation, then I wanted to get your opinion on what you thought was really happening here with this Fiscal Cliff deal, because last week we were talking about how this whole thing has been, it's the latest episode in the theater that we got to Fiscal Cliff, and they use that to keep everybody in a state of panic and fear for a while, and now that the whole thing is finally worked out, the average American has received immediate federal tax increases, $430 million for Hollywood through special expensing rules, $33 million for railroads, $222 million going towards Puerto Rico from taxes on rum, $70 million for NASCAR, and more. And according to a report by Ben Swan, through active financing exceptions, the corporations such as GE, Citigroup, and of course Goldman Sachs and those banks received billions of dollars. I mean, what do you think about this whole situation, John?
Well, we've seen this happen a few times. The last time they called it government shutdown or something like that. I think, I don't know if that was last time year switched over or if it was only like 6 months ago, but it was basically all this hype saying, oh my God, we need to have this, meeting, and we need to figure out all these things because that's what we do. We're politicians and we work real hard, that's the whole theater that's going on. And really what they're doing is just they're trying to figure out how they can get through the things that they want to get through to benefit them and their special interests under the umbrella of this fiscal cliff. It's kind of the same approach they take with things like the Patriot Act and things like that, or the National Defense Authorization Act. They roll a whole bunch of junk into a really, really hyped-up bill, and they put all this fear into people, and they say, you're going to lose your services if we don't figure this out. And whatever this is, they put a label on it, and under the umbrella of that label, they just use it to pass through whatever they want to. And nobody even realizes because they just, oh, it's the fiscal cliff. And, I mean, me, as somebody who's involved in the rave scene, I had to experience this pretty much getting into that because the Amber Alert bill, I think I may have told you about this before, the one where, missing children, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Rave Act is hidden into that, and it's it basically arrests or says that anybody who hosts a rave can be arrested as somebody who's running a crack house. And just this is what politicians do. They're really sneaky with things, and they used hyped-up emotional titles and descriptions for the bills that they pass, and their bills are filled with hundreds of pages of laws, most of which don't have anything to do with the stated goals. Sorry for that rant there.
No, you're 100% correct, man. And I remember years ago, one of the first times I had started to realize this was just reading through some of Ron Paul's work and him talking about his experience being in office and seeing other politicians do that, just tack on all kinds of things to bills and pass them at the last minute and things like that. And like you said, they use this as an opportunity to call this bill, this fiscal cliff, which is essentially just another highway robbery of the people for corporations and banks. They call it, this fiscal cliff and tell everybody that the government may shut down and the world may end, and hype it up, as you said, when in reality it's just they're robbing us right in front of our faces. Ben Swan was saying in his report that the lobby firm that was actually responsible for helping get this deal set up was called Capital Tax Partners, and they've been working on this since early June. So the banks and the corporations have their people working on these things since the summer and planning out how to make it work perfectly. And then the government and the media just start talking about a fiscal cliff towards the end of the year and get everybody in a panic and all riled up while they rob us blind.
Yeah, exactly. And we saw the same thing with the bailouts and the wars. It's the same strategy that they use every single time. And still nobody really catches on. They just get hyped up on the new title of whatever's being thrown out there.
Exactly. So, you said you see this as a distraction. Explain more how you see this as a distraction.
Well, just the title of Fiscal Cliff being a distraction, like it's a sleight of hand. You know what I mean?
Okay, just them using the euphemism and the Orwellian doublespeak to tell what they're really doing.
Yeah, them using a really vague phrase like fiscal cliff to describe, a whole bunch of laws and taxes and reforms and things like that. And basically all that the public is getting from the media is, oh, the government has hit a fiscal cliff, and if they can't come to an agreement, then the government is going to shut down. And in reality, as that whole segment that you sent me with Ben Swan and everything, it's exactly what's happening. It's a sleight of hand, and they're doing all this crap behind the scenes that they really would not have been able to get away with if it was all laid out in plain English for the public.
Exactly. And I don't have a traditional job where I'm paying taxes, but I've spoken to two friends already in just the past day who said that, yeah, they have noticed an increase in money taken from their check because this is the same situation we're going to see in the future. So hopefully people we're going to be feeling the hurt right away. You look at what's happening in the European Union and how the people continue to be taken from out there. We're basically facing austerity in this country, but they're masking it and by telling us that unemployment's down, jobs are up, and here's this bill that's going to, help save the government so we can keep working out, when in reality, they're starting to take from the people more and more every day.
Yeah, and then they're printing more money too, which is devaluing the money that's already out there, and especially by the time that all the capital from the loans that goes back and forth actually makes its way down below the ruling class, it's not even going to be worth anything after that certain period of time that it's printed. So then they're stealing money from us that way as well. And as you said, with the European Union, people are getting thrown out of their houses. There's people rows and rows of people living on the street in certain places in Spain and, other countries in the European Union. So that's why everybody's freaking out over there, and rightfully so. You know what I'm saying? But also there is a little bit of hope with that because I'm sure that you've seen a lot of the same stories that I've seen with the agorism that's kind of starting to spread out in Europe as a result of just the need. Their economy is collapsing, and what are you going to do? You still need to provide goods and services for your community and have your community provide goods and services for you in a voluntary fashion without the government who has failed there. So I think that is kind of a glimmer of hope that we can see out of that situation.
Definitely, you're 100% right about that. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with John Goodvibes of the Intel Hub and the Alchemy of the Modern Renaissance. You're listening to Conscious Resistance. We'll be right back. TVs and magazines as they try to implement a fascist regime. Corporations have been enthroned in the U.S., so all major media outlets are now useless. And now we're going to switch gears and get into some police state news. John, you wrote a story earlier this week. Tell everybody about it.
Well, basically, I've been noticing over the past few months, and it's happened here and there in the past, but for some reason, there have been more and more cops and people involved in the legal system who are like literally framing people for the sake of their careers, you know, to further their careers, and they're getting tripped up and getting busted and caught. A couple months ago, I covered the story of the drug lab chemist who was falsifying drug tests and got hundreds of people put away that didn't deserve it. And now, this most recent case is a Utah state trooper. I think it was Lisa Steed was her name. She basically went around locking people up for DUIs that weren't drunk. And there's all sorts of dashboard cam evidence where she's giving people field sobriety tests and they're passing, and then she's locking them up anyway. And there was one guy that she tried to lock up, and he refused to go because he's like, I'm not drunk. This is crazy. What's wrong with you? And she tased him. And there's over 40 people that have now came forward, and they're filing a lawsuit against her and her superiors. And she's been fired and now is being investigated by the FBI because there's like so much evidence against her. It's crazy. And she was Trooper of the Year one year. That was another thing that was pretty crazy about it.
Obviously, it seems like Trooper of the Year may have been awarded to her for her outstanding record of catching DUIs.
Exactly. So, like...
I mean, what do you think this says?
Well, I think that this.
What do you think this says about the state of the police?
I think that naturally this kind of power should not be in people's hands. I mean, the cops should not be able to pull anybody over for really. I mean, reckless driving is understandable. Earlier this week, Jeffrey Tucker with the Mises Institute put out a really awesome article called "The Drunk Driving Question." And it was about how there shouldn't be drunk driving laws, and it's like they should just enforce reckless driving laws instead. Because when you don't, when you put that much power into people's hands, it just doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? Like it creates a situation where people are incentivized to be corrupt and to act this way, especially when there's things like quotas and they're benefiting from putting other people behind cages that haven't done anything wrong. Even if they were technically had drugs on them or might have been a little bit buzzed, they hadn't hurt anybody, so they hadn't committed any crimes. So I think that when you put people in a position to enforce nonviolent crimes, you're dealing, it's just a recipe for disaster, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Nonviolent victimless crimes, it becomes an easy target. And as we've already seen, the prison system is filled with people who have committed nonviolent victimless crimes, and usually, of course, drug offenses or alcohol offenses. I mean, how many people, possibly have had their lives ruined by the actions of this one police officer? And of course, some would say this is just the actions of one police officer. But as you started bringing in the segment by saying this is something that we're starting to see occurring more regularly.
Yeah, and it's not just with the police officers; it's with the bureaucrats too, because that one person that was testing, all the drug samples, she put like 250 some people away that weren't even guilty of the crime, and I think that like it creates this mentality where technically, as we always talk about with that book, everybody commits 3 felonies a day. And if that is the actual situation, then most people that end up on the other side of that system, on the aggressive side of that situation, they end up knowing, even on a subconscious level, that that's how the situation is. That everybody is technically a criminal. So if everybody is technically a criminal and you do well for grabbing these people up and bringing them into the system like a fisherman or something, then like you just have an incentive to maximize the amount of people that you bring into that system regardless of the consequences. Because if everybody out there is a criminal, then why should you have any remorse for, you know, the people that you catch up for your job?
Exactly. Now, I want to give you a chance. I don't know if you feel like doing this on air, but I know that the issue of police corruption and violence and brutality is something that you have personally been affected by in your life. Is that not true?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and on many levels. I mean, I have had personal situations where, you know, I've been ripped out of my car for having a gram of weed, like literally ripped out the window because, you know, I refuse search, as many of us do. But sometimes that isn't enough because I didn't have a decent cell phone at the time, so I couldn't, you know, record the situation. And I've been affected on a secondary level by the drug war as well. As I mentioned earlier, I've been involved with throwing raves and things like that for 5 or 6 years. So every time I get a new spot that's pretty cool and people start to like it, it isn't a couple months before it gets shut down some way, or it gets raided, or we get cops outside every night. So that has severely affected my business to the point where I had to completely reformat my stuff, and I don't really even do that many of those kind of events anymore because all the venues are gone. It affected me on many levels, and I know pretty much everybody out there has had this kind of experience with not just the drug war, but victimless crimes in general. Anybody that has to deal with, you know, nonsense fees and taxes and things like that, or, you know, anybody that wants to start a business and can't get it up off the ground because they've got to go through all these licensing and all these requirements that the average person is just incapable of doing because that's how it's set up.
Exactly. And briefly, we've got a couple minutes before we cut to the next break. What's a solution that you would offer to take the place of the current police corruption that we know today?
Well, I hate to kind of go with the typical voluntarist line on this, but definitely breaking the monopoly. You know, right now they're the only people that can provide the service that they do, and not only that, we're forced to pay for it. So stop forcing us to pay for that, and one, they'll go away because nobody will be paying them anymore, and instead we'll be able to figure out ways amongst ourselves to do it. My personal feeling is that in a free society that police might work on kind of a more like co-op-ish level, like with volunteering and time trading and things like that. I think it'll get to the point where people decide, like, hey, when we're putting violence into people's hands, we got to be extremely careful with this. You know what I'm saying? And when you're even putting violence into people's hands in this situation, they would not be. They would actually be subject to other people's, opinions, really. Right now, nobody, they don't have to worry about what anybody thinks of them. But if they're dependent upon, you know, the community for their survival, or it's the community trading time with things like that, then people who are being corrupt can really easily be exiled and pushed out.
Yeah, you're 100% right about that. If we had a situation where there was not a monopoly on, I mean, there's a monopoly on on every aspect of our entire life, almost, at least where the hands of the corporations and the governments can be found. And if that monopoly did not exist with the police in this fashion, for example, where I stay, HPD, Houston Police Department, which is known for their their love of putting their hands on people, I could put my taxes or my money towards some other cause that I believe in, towards another community organization that might protect me. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to go to the news and be back in the next hour to get into voluntarism and the Constitution with John Goodvibes. I wanted to get into an amazing article that you wrote earlier this week, I believe, and that I was very excited to see because it's something that I wish I had written. It's a great piece there, and it's going to sort of set the tone for the rest of the show and for the second hour. So tell everybody about this article and what caused you to write it. It's called A Voluntarist Perspective on the Constitutional Law Debate.
Well, as I'm sure you've noticed, there's, I think it was basically started by that New York Times editorial, although there have been comments made by some mainstream media pundits in the past to the same effect. And that is basically that the Constitution is either outdated or irrelevant and should be done away with because it gives people too many freedoms, essentially. And then there's the other side of that who, the counter-argument, which is, oh, no, the Constitution is the be-all, end-all, and it is, you've heard it all. My perspective is a third angle on it, which I don't really think has been brought forward very much, at least in the mainstream media. People that are kind of on the level with us have probably been having the same kind of conversation. And my personal take on it is that the Constitution is definitely relevant in the sense that it is a document that recorded philosophical truths that have existed since the beginning of time. And that is something that's important to realize. Many people get the idea that our freedoms come from the Constitution, and I think that's one of the things that muddies the water with these debates, because if it is just the whims of some dudes 300, 200 years ago, whatever, then it's not that big of a deal to overrule like these guys are suggesting. They're saying, oh, it's a different time. Those people back then thought differently. But those people, which are the founders, many of them disagreed with how this particular government should be founded. And the Constitution is not just, it doesn't just contain one specific philosophy or one specific idea, because there were all these different people with these different ideas who we now call the founders, who were kind of trying to start this new society in their philosophical kind of ideology. And the people who ended up winning out were the Federalists, who were basically the ones who wanted to establish the government. And they used the Constitution to establish that government, as many people who have researched and read Lysander Spooner and his work, The Constitution and No Authority, would understand. So there's so many different angles to the Constitution. The Bill of Rights was basically a compromise that happened after the fact when people rebelled, and the, I guess, liberty-minded rhetoric that's in the Constitution was also a compromise to the anti-federalists, who many of them were totally ready to overthrow the government in America before it even began, because they, like us, understood that you can't give a third party the power to disrupt the lives of innocent people. You just can't do that. But, the Federalists wanted to establish their government in the image of the British Empire to protect their own interests, which they had worked their whole lives through politics to establish. So there are many different philosophies within the Constitution, but I think it's not something that we should scrap in a sense of totally forgetting about it, because, as I said before, it documented very real, very important things that people should know about. And I'm glad that they did record that stuff for future generations. If they didn't, we would probably be running around even more stupid than we are now, because we wouldn't have anything that was preserved to look back on to find those, inalienable rights, as they said. And that was the language that was used by many of those anti-federalists. They said, we're not coming up with these ideas. These are self-evident ideas that have already existed since the beginning of time. We're just writing them down on paper because so many people have violated them in the past. So I think that while it is definitely important to defend the rights that are mentioned in the Constitution, I also think it's important to be very specific and not talk in such black and white terms when we have this conversation about constitutional law. So,
exactly. I definitely agree with your take on that. For me, I've never considered myself to be the biggest constitutionalist, but I also understand it as a frame of reference and use it to whatever degree I can to try to protect myself and really just as a reference, because like you said, these rights are there, they exist because we exist. The Constitution just shows us that they're there, but too many people have put all their faith into the Constitution as well. And also, to me, when I hear people sort of hark back to 1776 and the days of the Constitution and things like that, I think we can do better than that. So I think that the Constitution is something that can help us in certain ways, but it's also something that we can evolve even further past, because those rights are there, but we can create a society where we don't even necessarily need to have the Constitution on paper. We can just know that these are our rights amongst each other.
Well, I mean, really, all you need is the first sentence or whatever, and you're done, or the first couple sentences, and you're done. Everybody was created equal, life, liberty, and property, and then you're done. You're done. No need to give somebody the right to tax or the right to legislate or any of that. People will find out how to create their society on their own. You don't need to grant specific people certain powers in order for things to get done. So that's the issue that I take with the Constitution. But I definitely want to be clear, because many of the people who subscribe to my stuff are totally on the constitutionalist level, you know what I'm saying? So, and I have conversations with them all the time about this situation, and I see where they're coming from. And it's also difficult when they've been taught this kind of stuff their whole life, that, like, this is where we have our freedoms from. And it's like, maybe it has helped us in a legal perspective in certain situations, but on the other side, when you look at where it gave Congress the power to tax, it's like that completely destroyed everything. So, and that was the Federalists' influence. So it's definitely important to realize that the Constitution wasn't written by one group of people that all agreed on everything. So you really do have to, kind of have a good background knowledge on the history of the drafting of the Constitution and where it came from and how it got to where it was, kind of before you start, putting out these I don't think these people that write these New York Times articles have any clue about any of this, and I really don't think that they have any ability to talk properly on this.
That's 100% right, and we're going to have to let you go today for today, John, and I'm going to tell everybody where to find you. JG Vibes, you can find him on Facebook. Of course, his articles on the Intel Hub, also activist post, and I repost them on the HoustonFreethinkers.com as well. I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right, thanks a lot, bro.
We'll be back in just a minute.